The first sign that peace was a lie wasn't the sound of the truck. It was the silence of the dog. One moment, Kodiak was just a dog, a 90-pound Belgian Malinois, black as shadow, sniffing the perimeter of the rented cabin. The next, he was a weapon system. His head snapped up. His panting ceased, replaced by an absolute focused stillness. His ears, satellites in the high Montana wind, locked onto the sound of the approaching engine, a sound that was 0.2 of a second wrong. Jack, sitting on the porch, felt it. He didn't hear the truck. He felt the change in Kodiak. The dog's tension was a high-frequency wire that ran straight into Jack's own fractured nervous system. Jack's hand stopped halfway to his coffee mug. The search for peace was officially over. Jack had come to the Big Empty to find exactly that. Empty. He'd rented a cabin so far up a logging road that Amazon just gave up. For the past 6 weeks, he had been trying to scrub the sand, the smell of cordite, and the high-pitched whine of drone engines from his brain. He was on extended leave, a polite term for too damaged to deploy, too valuable to cut loose. His only companion was Kodiak. Kodiak was not a pet. Pets were soft. Pets begged for scraps and slept on beds. Kodiak was a partner. He was a 4-legged, fur-covered extension of Jack's will. A K9 who had cleared rooms in Kandahar with more courage than most men. Now, like Jack, he was retired. But the war hadn't retired from them. Jack was healing from a piece of shrapnel that had shattered his femur. Kodiak was healing from the psychological trauma of seeing his previous handler, Jack's best friend, not get up. They were 2 broken veterans, sitting on a porch, pretending the world wasn't coming for them. The truck, a jacked-up F-250 with a rusted-out grill and an engine that sounded like a bag of hammers, wasn't coming for Jack. Not yet. It roared past Jack's turnoff and slammed to a halt a quarter-mile down, at the gate of the only other property on this mountain, the old Miller Ranch. From his porch, Jack had a clear line of sight. He didn't need binoculars. His eyes were binoculars. He saw Sarah Miller. She was the definition of weathered a widow in her late 30s trying to run a ranch that was 500 acres of debt and drought. Jack had only nodded to her once at the feed store. Now, she was standing at her fence line, looking small and defiant. 2 men climbed out of the F-250. They were local muscle big-shouldered men in greasy Carhartt jackets and cheap sunglasses. This wasn't random. This was specific. Jack watched. Kodiak stood beside his chair, vibrating, a low rumble starting in his chest. "Easy, K," Jack murmured. "Not our fence." He watched the men gesture. They were loud, their voices carried on the wind as angry, indistinct noise. Thug Hashon, the leader, jabbed a finger toward the ground, then toward the house. Sarah shook her head. Thug Hashon kicked the fence post, a petty act of violence. Thug Hashtu just loomed, a wall of dumb intimidation. Then the screen door of the farmhouse banged open. A small boy, maybe 7, ran out. "Leave her alone." "Damn it," Jack thought. "The kid." Thug Hashon laughed. He turned, took 2 steps toward the boy, and grabbed his arm. "You best get back inside, little man, before you see something you don't want to." Sarah screamed. Jack was already moving. He didn't run. He flowed. He came off the porch, covered the quarter-mile of open field in a way that seemed to eat the ground, silent as smoke. He didn't yell. He didn't announce himself. Kodiak, unleashed and unmuzzled, was 3 steps ahead, running parallel. The thugs never saw them coming. Their focus was on the woman and the child. Thug Hashtu was the first to notice. He turned, maybe hearing the brush of Kodiak's paws on the dry grass. All he saw was a black and tan missile. Jack gave the command, a single, sharp syllable. "Watch." Kodiak didn't go for the throat. He wasn't there to kill. He was there to control. He slammed into the man's chest, using his momentum to knock the 250-pound man onto his back. He didn't bite. He just stood on the man's chest, his jaws inches from his face, and delivered a roar that sounded like it came from the depths of hell. Thug Hashtu went rigid with terror. 1 down. Thug Hashon, the one still holding the boy, had just enough time to turn. What the? Jack didn't give him the courtesy of a punch. Fighting was messy. What Jack did was work. He parried the man's clumsy attempt to shove him, captured the wrist, bent the elbow against the joint, and applied precise pressure to the man's brachial plexus. It was clinical. The man's arm went dead. His legs buckled. Jack didn't throw him. He guided him to the ground, face first, pinning the man's arm behind his back in a restraint hold that sent agony up his shoulder. The entire engagement, from Jack leaving the porch to two men being neutralized, had taken less than 40 seconds. Silence returned to the mountain, louder this time. The boy ran to his mother. Sarah stared at Jack, her eyes wide, unsure if she had just been saved by a man or a different kind of monster. Pause in the narrative. The expert persona steps in. This right here, this is the moment. It's not just about the fight. It's about the why. It's about the protectors who step out of the shadows, the ones who run toward the trouble. This is the core of what we do. Kodiak is more than a dog. He's a partner. Jack is more than a soldier. He's a guardian. If you believe in that bond, in the quiet, controlled courage it takes to stand between the innocent and the dark, then you've found your channel. Take 1 second. Hit that subscribe button for Courageous Paw. We are dedicated to telling the stories of these incredible K9 units and their handlers, the real-world heroes who ask for nothing and give everything. Click it. Join the pack. We'll wait right here for you. Narrative resumes. Jack let the pressure off the man's arm, just slightly. "Who sent you?" he asked, his voice calm. The man, Thug Hasson, just grunted and spat dirt. "You're dead. Thorne's gonna..." "Mr. Thorne can come himself next time," Jack said. He stood up, hauling the man to his feet by his jacket collar. Kodiak, seeing the threat was over, stepped off the other man's chest. But he didn't relax. He stood at heel, eyes locked on the two men, a statuesque threat. "Get in your truck," Jack said. It wasn't a request. Thug Hash-2 scrambled to his feet, holding his chest, and ran for the F-250. Thug Hasson, rubbing his shoulder, shot Jack a look of pure hatred. "This ain't over, vet." Jack just looked at him. He didn't flinch. He didn't threaten. He just was. He was the immovable object. The man's bravado cracked. He got in the truck. They tore out, spinning gravel, leaving a cloud of dust and failure behind. Jack turned. His posture didn't change. He was still assessing threats. The primary threat was gone. But the secondary one, the entanglement, had just begun. Sarah Miller held her son's hand in a death grip. Are you okay, ma'am?" Jack asked. His voice, after the silence, sounded rusty. They keep saying we're on their land," Sarah said, her voice shaking, "saying the survey is wrong. They want us gone." Jack nodded. He recognized the pattern. It wasn't a land dispute. It was an invasion. He looked down the gravel road, in the direction the truck had gone. He looked at Kodiak, who was now patiently sniffing the boy's outstretched, trembling hand. "They'll be back," Jack said, to no one in particular. His vacation was over. The silence that followed the truck's retreat was heavy and metallic, like the taste of blood in the air. Jack didn't look at Sarah or her son, Leo. He was scanning the ridgeline, his head on a swivel, cataloging the angles of approach, the dead ground, the fatal funnels. The ranch wasn't a home. It was a tactical liability. "He's watching," Jack said, his voice flat. He turned to Kodiak, who was now sitting calmly, watching the dust cloud of the departed truck. Jack gave a hand signal. Kodiak trotted over and sat by the boy, pushing his head gently against the child's trembling hand. Inside, Jack said to Sarah, "Now, it wasn't the kitchen of a woman winning a fight. It was the kitchen of a woman drowning." The Formica counter was stacked with envelopes, red-stamped, "Final Notice, Delinquent." She poured coffee he didn't want. It was thin and bitter. They started about 6 months ago," Sarah said, her voice hollow. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "First, it was letters, offers. Fair market value," they said. Jack sipped the coffee. He listened. He was a professional listener. He was listening for what she wasn't saying. "It's the Aegis Mountain Development Group," she continued. They're building that new ski resort over on the West Peak. But the offers kept going up. Too high. Then the accident started. A cut fence line, a stray spark that burned my north pasture, my well pump mysteriously failing. And the cops? Jack asked. Sarah laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. The sheriff? He's on their payroll. He told me I was mishandling my property, and that maybe I should consider the offer before Child Services starts wondering if this is a safe environment. Jack's eyes went cold. That was the leverage. The boy. I won't sell, she said, her voice hardening, a flash of steel under the panic. This was my husband's land, his father's. They're buried out there. This is all we have. What aren't they building? Jack asked. What? It's not a ski resort. He set the mug down. A ski resort doesn't need that kind of muscle for one widow on a failing ranch. What's under your land, Sarah? She looked stunned. Nothing. It's just rock. My husband used to say it was pretty rock. He found some, I don't know, shiny green stones when he was digging post holes by the creek. Used one as a doorstop. Jack filed that away. Green stones. He looked at her, at the desperation, at the flimsy screen door that was her only defense. He had come here to be empty, to be left alone. Instead, he'd stepped directly into the one thing he couldn't walk away from a righteous fight. His vacation, his decompression, was over. The mission had found him. All right. First, your kitchen window makes you a target from the road. Stay in the back of the house after dark. He went to the door. Kodiak. The Malinois was instantly at his side. You said they come at night, Jack stated. I hear trucks. Sometimes I think someone's just watching. From the tree line, Jack knelt, looking the dog in the eye. He didn't speak in English. He spoke in a language of shared experience. He touched his own chest, then pointed to Sarah and Leo. Watch. It was a single word. Can. It wasn't protect or defend. It was watch. It meant, these are your assets. Nothing touches them. Nothing gets close. You are the wall. Kodiak, a K9 trained for the intricacies of war, seemed to nod. He walked over to the front door, circled once, and lay down. He was not relaxed. He was in Overwatch mode. A 90-pound breathing alarm system that could, if needed, become a 90-pound breathing claymore mine. Sarah let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. The simple presence of the dog was more reassuring than a dozen deadbolts. I'll be back before dawn, Jack said. Where are you going? She asked, panic returning. You're being probed, Jack said. They sent amateurs today. They won't tomorrow. I'm going to see what they're so desperate to protect. At 0200 hours, Jack was a ghost. He wasn't the man from the porch. He was dressed in dark grays and greens, his face streaked with mud. He moved not like a man, but like water, flowing through the ravines and tree lines he had cataloged earlier. He carried a small recon kit, a monocular, a multi-tool, and the 10-inch Kabar knife that never left his belt. The Aegis development site was 5 miles away, over the ridge. The perimeter wasn't marked by future home of the Eagle's Nest Lodge signs. It was marked by 1 0-foot-high chain-link fencing, topped with razor wire. This was not a resort. This was a compound. Jack found a high point, a rocky outcropping that gave him a clear view, and went to ground. He lay in the dirt, still as the rocks around him, and just watched. For an hour, nothing. Then, headlights. A convoy of 3 flatbed trucks, running without logos, rumbled up the access road. They weren't carrying lumber or chairlift parts. They were carrying industrial drilling equipment. Deep earth drills. The floodlights of the compound snapped on, illuminating the central work area. Jack raised his monocular. Armored guards. They weren't the local muscle from the F-250. These men wore matching uniforms, black tactical pants, plate carriers. They carried short-barreled rifles, held with professional familiarity. They were PMC's private military contractors. Jack scanned the compound. He saw crates, stacked and stenciled. He zoomed in. his breathing slow and steady, fogging the cold Montana air. The stencils weren't inventory codes. They were chemical symbols, REEs, rare earth elements. And there, half hidden by a tarp, was a massive, mobile processing unit. A centrifuge. Son of a bitch, Jack whispered into the wind. This wasn't a ski resort. It was an illegal, off-the-books, rare earth mining operation. The kind of thing that makes corporations billions and turns entire ecosystems into toxic sludge. The green stones on Sarah's land? That wasn't a coincidence. Her ranch wasn't in the way of the resort. Her ranch was the rest of the deposit. They weren't trying to buy her land. They were trying to steal it. Back at the ranch, at 0330, Sarah was asleep in her chair, exhausted. Leo was on a cot in the living room. Kodiak lay by the door. He lifted his head. His ears twitched, rotating. He stood, silent, and patted on Veteran's paws to the back window, the one facing the creek. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stood there, a black silhouette against the moonlight, and watched. Outside, 200 yards away in the creek bed, a man with night vision goggles lowered them. He was a scout for the PMC team, sent to see if the local problem had scared the widow off. He focused his goggles on the house, and in the window, he saw the dog. He saw the perfect stillness. He saw the outline of a Belgian Malinois, a war dog. He recognized it instantly. This wasn't a farm mutt. This was a professional. The scout lowered his goggles, backed away, and keyed his radio. Ironwood, this is Scout 2. The asset is, not as advertised. We have a new variable, K9 on premises. Looks like a Mal. Stand by for new sitrep. Inside the house, Kodiak let out a small, quiet huff through his nose. He turned, walked back to the front door, and lay down. The probe had been repelled. The perimeter was secure. When Jack slipped back into the house an hour before sunrise, a shadow returning, the first thing he saw was Kodiak, who lifted his tail and thumped it once on the floor. The second thing he saw was the boy, Leo, who had dragged his blanket out of his room to sleep on the floor, 6 feet away from the dog. Jack looked at the scene. He knew what the Aegis group was. He knew what they were capable of. And he knew, with the cold certainty of a combat deployment, that this was no longer a request for help. It was an enlistment. The sun had barely cleared the eastern ridge, but the war had already changed. In a glass-walled office in Helena, 150 miles away, Marcus Thorne, Regional Director of Aegis Mountain Development, hung up the phone. He was not a thug. He was a man who wore Italian leather shoes and believed that violence was a symptom of inefficiency. His PMC Scouts 4 a.m. report had been efficient, but unsettling. K9 on premises. Malinois. Professional handling. Thorne had authorized the local muscle, he despised using such crude tools, to scare a grieving widow. Instead, they had poked a sleeping bear. And that bear, it seemed, had a military-grade dog. He looked at the geological survey on his desk. The vibrant green, indicating the densest concentrations of neodymium and dysprosium, was centered exactly on the Miller Ranch. The ski resort was a $100 million lie to cover a $5 billion illegal mining operation. He would not let one woman and a stray vet derail it. He's a vet? Thorne had asked his head of security. Looks like it. The way he moved, the way the dog works. Not some weekend warrior. Might be specialized. Then we stop treating this like a fist fight, Thorne decided. We treat it like a PR problem. Bury them, but bury them in paper. He swiveled his chair to face the window. Call legal, get the injunction, and call county. I want a full court press, health department, EPA, and call that woman at Child Services, the one we helped with her gambling issue. Tell her it's time to return a favor. The first shot of this new war was not a bullet. It was a pearl-white Cadillac Escalade. It crunched up the gravel driveway at 10 a.m., and a man in a pinstripe suit stepped out. He moved with the slow, predatory confidence of someone who bills in 6-minute increments. Jack and Kodiak were on the porch. Kodiak didn't growl. He just stood, a silent black statue of potential energy. Sarah Miller? The lawyer asked, not looking at Jack. Yes? He produced a sheaf of papers. You are hereby served with an emergency injunction from the Environmental Protection Agency, citing gross negligence in the management of agricultural runoff, which is contaminating the Graybull Creek watershed. Jack read the document over her shoulder. It was full of $5 words and subsections, but the meaning was simple. We own you. But my runoff? I've got 30 head of cattle. Sarah was bewildered. The injunction, the lawyer continued, allows for an immediate and temporary freeze on all assets associated with this property to prevent further environmental damage. Your bank accounts are frozen, effective 1 hour ago. They can't. They can, the lawyer said, a small reptilian smile playing on his lips. Have your attorney contact our office. Oh, and mister? He finally looked at Jack. You'll find that trespassing in violation of a federal order carries a rather steep penalty. I'd be careful where you step. He got back in his Escalade and was gone. The silence was total. Sarah sank onto the porch swing, the papers rattling in her hand. My accounts? Jack, I can't buy feed. I can't pay the electric. What am I supposed to? Jack felt a cold, familiar anger. This was the same tactic he'd seen insurgents use overseas. Cut the food, cut the power, turn the population. He looked at Kodiak. The dog, sensing Jack's frustration, whined low in his throat. Ias, K, Jack muttered. Can't beat the bank account. The second shot came the next morning. It wasn't an Escalade. It was a mud-spattered, county-issued Ford Taurus. A woman in a stained pantsuit, carrying a heavy clipboard, knocked on the door. This was the one that broke them. Mrs. Miller, I'm Janice Rourke, from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous tip regarding the welfare of your son, Leo. If the lawyer had been a viper, this woman was a vulture. She walked into the house, her eyes cataloging every crack in the plaster, every unwashed dish, the threadbare state of Leo's t-shirt. The report alleges an unstable living environment, she said, her voice a monotone drone. I see you're having financial difficulties. And who is this? She looked at Jack. She didn't look at him with fear. She looked at him like he was a piece of evidence. He's a neighbor. A friend, Sarah stammered. A friend, Rourke repeated, writing it down. The report mentions an unidentified male of unstable temperament living on the property. It also mentions a dangerous animal. She looked at Kodiak, who was lying by the fireplace, watching her every move. He's not dangerous. Leo piped up, running to Kodiak's side. Leo, hush! Sarah panicked. So the animal is yours? Rourke asked Jack, her pen hovering. He's mine, Jack said, his voice level. He's a retired service dog, I see. A service dog trained for what exactly? Attacking people. This was the trap. Jack saw it instantly. He was a man of violence. His very presence, his skills, the dog at his feet, they were being weaponized against the people he was trying to protect. Ma'am, Jack said, you're being used. What I'm being is a state advocate for that child, Rourke snapped. And what I see is a home in financial ruin, a mother on the verge of a breakdown, and a strange man with a trained attack dog. This is not a safe environment. She turned to Sarah. I'm scheduling an emergency custody hearing. You have 48 hours to rectify this situation, or Leo will be placed in temporary foster care. She left. The sound that came out of Sarah was a sound Jack had only heard once before, from a grieving mother in a bombed-out village. It was the sound of a human spirit breaking. She collapsed at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, and sobbed. Get out, she whispered. Sarah, get out, she shrieked, standing up, her face pale and twisted. This is your fault. They were just scaring me before. But you and that dog, you fought them. Now they're taking my son. They're taking my boy because of you. Kodiak, sensing the distress, padded over and pushed his head into her hand. Sarah recoiled, slapping him away. "Get it away from me," Kodiak yelped, more in surprise than pain, and retreated to Jack's side, looking up at him, utterly confused. Why is the asset hostile? What is the command? Jack stood there, a ghost in her kitchen. He was a man trained to break armies, to topple regimes, to fight monsters in the dark. And he was completely, utterly useless. He couldn't punch CPS. He couldn't shoot a court order. He couldn't intimidate a bank. The system was the weapon, and he was just a blunt instrument. He backed out of the house. I'll be at my cabin." He and Kodiak walked out onto the porch. Sarah slammed and bolted the door behind them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. Jack sat on the steps of his own rented cabin, a quarter-mile away, the one place he'd come for peace. He could still hear her crying. Kodiak laid his massive head on Jack's knee, letting out a long, frustrated sigh. "She's right, Kay," Jack said, his voice rough. He scrubbed the dog's ears. "I brought a gun to a knife fight, and they brought a lawyer. We can't win this way." He looked at the darkening mountains. Thorne had used the system. Thorne had a team. Jack pulled out his satellite phone. He scrolled through a single-name list until he found the one he needed. It was time to fight fire with fire, or, in this case, fight a bureaucracy with a ghost. He hit send. The phone rang twice, then picked up. "It's been a while, brother," a voice on the other end said, all static and calm. "Ghost," Jack said. "I've got a problem, and I can't punch it." "Ghost," Jack said, his voice a low rasp into the sat phone. "I've got a problem, and I can't punch it." He was back in his cabin, Kodiak watching the door, the dog's internal compass still pointed toward Sarah's ranch. The shame of being kicked out, of her accusing him, was a tangible weight. It felt worse than the shrapnel. The voice that came back was digital, tinny, and powered by an ocean of caffeine. "Punching is your brand, brother. What's the play? You sound non-kinetic. Aegis Mountain Development. They're running an illegal rare earth mine under the cover of a ski resort. They're trying to force a widow, Sarah Miller, off her land. They froze her assets, EPA injunction. They're sending CPS to take her kid in 48 hours. Jesus, Jack. You stepped right in it, didn't you? Aegis. Yeah, I know 'em. They're a ghost subsidiary of a much larger, much darker parent company. They don't just build, they acquire. Send me the EPA files." "How?" "Hold the phone up to the documents. The camera is shit, but my AI will fill in the blanks." Jack did. For a full minute, the only sound was Jack breathing and the faint static of the uplink. "Got it," Go said. "This is sloppy, but effective. The judge who signed this, he's got a kid at a private university in Switzerland. Guess who's paying the tuition? The CPS agent, Janice Rourke? She's got a $60,000 gambling debt that was settled anonymously 2 weeks ago. This isn't a bureaucracy, Jack. It's a conspiracy. Can you fix it?" Jack asked. "Fix it? I'm going to burn it," Ghost said. The sound of rapid, rhythmic typing was audible. "I'm already in their local server. I'm going to leak the tuition payments to a reporter in Helena. I'm going to anonymously transfer the Rourke file to the State Attorney General's Public Corruption Task Force. I'll make it look like an internal whistleblower. But Jack, this takes time. The paper trail has to be perfect. They're going to feel the heat, but not before your 48-hour clock runs out." "Ghost, I don't have 48 hours. They know I'm here. They know I'm a problem. Then you have to be a different kind of problem. I'll handle the paper. You handle the wet work. But Jack, be smart. These guys aren't the local yahoos from the F-250. Aegis keeps a retainer on a risk management firm, X-Delta, real deal operators. If they escalate, they're escalating to you." The line went dead. Ghost was wrong. They weren't going to escalate. They already had. In his Helena office, Marcus Thorne stood before a man who seemed to absorb the light in the room. His name was Stryker. He was the CEO of the risk management firm, and he looked at Thorne with the flat, dead eyes of a shark. "You said it was a simple acquisition," Stryker said. His voice was calm, which made it terrifying. "It was," Thorne said, hating the defensive tone in his voice. "A widow, a child, a clean, bureaucratic removal. Then this variable showed up. Jack Kilgore," Stryker said, reading from a tablet. "Ex-SEAL, Team 3, specialized in, well, everything. Decorated for valor, then quietly put on extended leave after his last op went sideways. His K9, Kodiak, is a multi-million-dollar asset. You didn't poke a bear, Mr. Thorne. You kicked a hornet's nest. A very, very precise hornet's nest. Can you handle it?" Stryker almost smiled. "We're not the local muscle. We don't scare people. We solve problems. The problem is that Kilgore is here. The problem is the woman won't leave. The solution is to remove them both." "No," Thorne said, a little too quickly. "No killing. Not on U.S. soil. The blowback." "I don't kill," Stryker corrected him. "I manage. My team is already in the air. We'll be on the ground by 2200. We will infiltrate the ranch, plant evidence of, let's say, gross endangerment. A meth lab. Something simple. Something that makes the CPS case immediate and non-reversible. We'll find it, call it in. The woman is discredited, the child is removed, and the property is seized as a hazard. And Kilgore? He's a trespasser. He'll be deterred. My men will provide a very compelling argument for him to leave the state. If he chooses not to accept that argument, a man with his history of PTSD, found wandering in the woods. It's a tragedy, but it's not our problem." Thorne nodded, satisfied. "Do it. Tonight." Jack didn't know about Stryker. He didn't know about the helicopter or the plan to plant a meth lab. But Kodiak did. Or rather, he knew something was coming. Jack was at his cabin, pacing. He was trapped. He couldn't go back to Sarah's, not while she saw him as the source of her problems. He was waiting for Ghost's paper attack to land. Kodiak, however, was not pacing. He was standing at the front window, perfectly still, his head pointed at the western ridgeline, the one that overlooked both Jack's cabin and Sarah's ranch. "What is it, Kay?" Jack murmured. Kodiak didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just vibrated. A low, internal hum of focus. His ears were radar dishes, swiveling independently, processing sounds Jack's human ears couldn't even register. He was focused on a cluster of rocks 1,000 yards out. Jack grabbed his monocular. He scanned the ridge. Nothing. Just rocks and wind-blasted pines. "I don't see anything, Bud." Kodiak let out a soft huff of air through his nose. He took one step back from the window, into the shadow of the room, but kept his eyes locked on the ridge. He was breaking his own silhouette. It was a trained response. Jack went cold. He scanned the ridge again, slower this time. He wasn't looking for a man. He was looking for a mistake. A piece of glass. An unnatural shadow. A shape that was too perfect. There. It wasn't a glint. It was the absence of a glint. A small, perfectly circular shadow, nestled between two boulders, where there should have been sunlight. It was a sunshade, on a spotting scope. "Son of a bitch," Jack whispered. It was a sniper hide. An SR surveillance and reconnaissance team. They were too far to make a shot, but they were in a perfect overwatch position to observe both properties. They were mapping his movements. They were watching Sarah. They were the eyes. And if the eyes were here, the hands were on their way. Kodiak suddenly left the window. He padded to the back door, the one that faced the dense forest. He sniffed the air, then let out a single sharp bark. It wasn't an alarm. It was an alert. Jack was by his side in a second. "What?" Kodiak was agitated, sniffing the air coming under the door. He smelled them. Men. Not the smell of local muscle diesel and cheap cigarettes. This was the clean, metallic smell of gun oil, infrared, and something else. the scent of other predators. The wet work Ghost had warned him about? It wasn't coming in 48 hours. It was coming tonight. Jack grabbed his kit. He was done waiting. He looked at Kodiak, who was now poised at the door, vibrating with contained energy, waiting for the one word he understood better than any other. "They're not just watching the ranch, Kay," Jack said, his voice ablaze. "They're coming for it." He hit the main breaker, plunging the cabin into darkness. "Let's go to work." Jack didn't go out the front door. He exited the back, a ghost fading into the ravine behind his cabin. This was dead ground, a natural trench of erosion and shadow, completely obscured from the sniper's perch on the ridge. Kodiak moved ahead, a black ribbon of smoke flowing over the damp earth. His paws were silent on the thick carpet of pine needles. He wasn't panting. His breathing was a controlled, shallow cycle. This wasn't a run. It was a stalk. Jack was right behind him, his own movements a mirror of the dog's, his world painted in the enhanced, monochrome green of his low-light glasses. The air was cold, sharp, and carried the scent of resin and distant wood smoke. Kodiak froze. Jack stopped instantly, his hand hovering over the grip of his kabar. Kodiak's head was low, ears pricked forward. He wasn't looking. He was listening. Jack listened with him. He heard it too. Not a footstep, not a voice. He heard the absence of sound. The night insects, the crickets, the katydids had gone silent in a 50-yard patch of woods to their left. Something heavy was moving through their territory. Jack gave a low, two-fingered tap to his own chest. Kodiak sank to the ground, motionless. They were good. Very good. Stryker's men. They weren't using flashlights. They were moving in a staggered column, using IR strobes on their helmets that were invisible to the naked eye, but lit up like Christmas lights in Jack's glasses. 4 of them. Their gear was buttoned down. Nothing rattled. Suppressed M4S, plate carriers, a professional, rolling overwatch. They were heading straight for the creek bed. It was the only covered and concealed route to Sarah's farmhouse, just as Jack had planned. A perfect, fatal funnel. Jack and Kodiak had gotten there first. Jack slipped his sat phone from his pocket. It was already open to his text exchange with Ghost. He typed one word, contact. He pulled Kodiak tight, whispering into the dog's ear, his hand gripping the scruff of his neck. Wait for it. Wait for it. The 4 PMCs dropped into the shallow creek bed, the sound of their boots splashing in the ankle-deep water masked by the gurgle of the stream. They were 30 yards away. The phone in Jack's hand vibrated. The text from Ghost was one line. Packet sent. Their mesh net is down. Clock is 90 seconds. Go. On cue, the lead PMC, Alpha 2-1, stopped. He tapped his earpiece. He tapped it again, annoyed. He turned to signal to the man behind him, 2-2. That was the separation. That was the mistake. Get him, Jack whispered, his voice a blade, pointing at the last man in the column, the rear guard, Alpha 2-4. Kodiak didn't bark. He didn't growl. He launched. He cleared the 10 yards from the bank to the man in less than a second. Alpha 2-4 was scanning their 6, just as his training dictated. He heard a splash, turned, and had just enough time to register a black shape in the air before 90 pounds of focused kinetic fury slammed into his chest. The impact, not a bite, was the weapon. It was a takedown so violent it snapped the man's head back against a rock in the creek bed. A wet crack, and the man went limp. One down. Simultaneously, Jack was moving. He exploded from the shadows. Not at the 2 confused men in the middle, but at the point man, 2-1, the one who was still fiddling with his radio. 2-1 looked up from his comms, his rifle coming up. Jack was already inside his arc. This wasn't a brawl. It was geometry. Jack didn't grab the rifle. He parried it, his left hand striking the barrel, deflecting it. His right hand, stiffened into a blade, struck the man's throat. As the man gasped, Jack hooked his arm, spun, and used the man's own momentum to break his elbow over his shoulder. The snap of the bone was louder than the suppressed gunfire would have been. 2 down. The 2 middlemen, 2-2 and 2-3, finally reacted. They were Delta. They were fast. They raised their rifles, but they had no target. Jack was gone, a splash in the dark, having used 2-1 as a shield before dropping him. "Where is he?" 2-2 hissed, his IR laser cutting through the darkness. Kodiak answered. Having left 2-4, the dog was now a flanking element. He burst from the creek, not at the man, but at his weapon. His jaws clamped down on the rifle's handguard. He didn't pull. He twisted. A violent, alligator-like roll. The rifle was ripped from 2-2's grip, and the man screamed as his trigger finger snapped in the guard. 2-3, the last man, saw the dog and made the fatal error. He aimed at Kodiak. "No!" Jack yelled, rising from the water behind him. 2-3 turned, but he was too late. Jack's arm wrapped around his neck in a rear-naked choke. But this wasn't a sport. Jack's other hand grabbed the back of the man's helmet. He pulled back, hyperextending the neck, while his bicep crushed the carotid artery. The man struggled for 3 seconds. 4. Then he was just dead weight. The entire engagement had lasted less than 15 seconds. Silence flooded back into the creek bed, broken only by the sound of gurgling water and the harsh, pained breathing of the man with the broken arm. Kodiak, uncommanded, moved to the man with the broken finger, 2-2, who was clutching his hand. The dog didn't attack. He just stood over him, a silent, panting promise of violence, pinning him in place with sheer presence. Jack, breathing hard, let the dead man fall. He moved to the point man, 2-1, who was groaning, and used a zip tie from the man's own vest to secure his hands. He found the backpack they had dropped. He unzipped it. Inside, pre-packaged anhydrous ammonia, lithium strips, Sudafed cases, beakers, and tubing. The meth lab, the evidence. The radio on the point man's vest suddenly crackled. The 90-second shout from Ghost was over. Alpha 2. Alpha 2. This is Alpha 1, sit rep. Our comms just came back. Do you read? It was the sniper on the ridge, his voice tight with anxiety. Jack picked up the hand mic. He looked at the 4 neutralized PMCs. He looked at the meth lab kit in his hand. He looked at Kodiak, who was still standing guard, his job done. Jack keyed the mic. He didn't speak. He just clicked the transmit button. Twice. Click, click. 1,000 yards away, in the sniper hide, Alpha 1 heard the signal. His blood went cold. Click, click. That wasn't a sit rep. It wasn't all clear. It was a message. It was gloat. He ripped his eye from the scope. Ironwood, he whispered into his own sat phone, his voice shaking. This is Alpha 1. The ground team is gone. I repeat, Alpha 2 is down. The asset. The asset has compromised the package. We are non-mission capable. We are bugging out. Now, Stryker's first move was off the board. Jack had just captured all his pieces. The creek was a graveyard of broken gear and broken men. Jack worked with a cold, brutal efficiency, zip-tying the 2 conscious operators, the one with the broken arm, the one with the broken finger, back to back around a thick pine. He disarmed them, confiscated their comms, and left the dead man where he lay, a silent warning. The 4th man, the one Kodiak had knocked cold, was starting to groan. Jack bound him too. They were professionals. They wouldn't bleed out from these injuries. But they wouldn't be walking. Not until morning. He grabbed the backpack, the meth lab kit. This was the leverage. This was the truth. Heal, he commanded. Kodiak, his fur still damp, shook himself once a spray of creek water and adrenaline, and fell into perfect step behind his handler. They moved back to the ranch, this time using the open path. The time for stealth was over. The time for confrontation was now. When he knocked on Sarah's door, the sun was just a rumor of pale gray in the east. She opened it, her face a mask of sleepless terror. She saw Jack, his clothes soaked, mud on his face, holding a tactical backpack. She saw the black dog standing beside him, alert and calm. "You need to see this," Jack said. He didn't wait for an invitation. He walked in, dumped the backpack on her kitchen table, and unzipped it. The glass beakers, tubing, and chemical packets tumbled out, clattering on the formica. "This," Jack said, his voice flat, "is what they were planting. This is why they sent CPS. They weren't going to get you out, they were going to frame you. Take your son, seize your land as a drug hazard. It was clean, no loose ends. Sarah stared at the pile of evidence. The color drained from her face. The fight she had been fighting, the one with lawyers and letters, was a child's game. This was real. I, she stammered. You were right. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Jack said. Be angry. Kodiak, sensing the shift, that the internal threat was gone, padded past them. He went to the cot where Leo was sleeping, sniffed the boy's hair, and lay down on the floor beside him, a 90-pound guardian resuming his post. Jack's sat phone buzzed. A text from Ghost. It's done. CPS agent Rourke is in cuffs. AG's office raided her home an hour ago. The judge is recusing himself due to a family emergency. The injunction on her assets is gone by noon. The paper war is won, brother, but their comms are back up. They know their team is gone. Jack showed her the phone. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself a single, sharp sob of relief. It's over? Jack looked at the high-tech, military-grade comms he'd thrown on her counter. No, he said, his voice grim. It's just escalated. 3,000 miles away, in a glass tower that pierced the night sky of Manhattan, the escalation was already being managed. The man known only as the director stood looking out a floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights were a galaxy at his feet. He was not a man given to emotion. He saw the world as a portfolio, and his portfolio was currently suffering an unacceptable risk. On a massive screen behind him, Stryker, the PMC commander, the shark who had visited Thorne, was speaking, his voice tinny and desperate. A total loss. The ground team is compromised. The asset, Kilgore. He neutralized all four. The sniper team exfilled, but the package is lost. The local paper assets, the judge, the CPS agent, they've been burned. Simultaneously. This wasn't a lucky vet. This was a coordinated counter-op. The director was silent. He sipped his water. He hated noise. He hated inefficiency. And this entire Montana operation had become a deafening, clumsy mess. Thorne was greedy. Stryker was arrogant. They had used PMC's sledgehammers when the situation clearly called for a scalpel. The rare earth mine was a $5 billion prize. But the exposure now was a $50 billion liability. This Jack Kilgore had, in one night, turned a quiet acquisition into a potential federal investigation. The mine is no longer the objective, Mr. Stryker, the director said. His voice was soft, amplified by the mic on his desk. Sir, the objective is containment. The operation is scrubbed. You and Mr. Thorne have failed to manage the situation. You have become a loose end. Stryker's face went pale on the screen. Sir, I can fix this. Give me 24 hours. I'll lead the team myself. No. The director terminated the call. He looked at the blinking red light on his console that represented the Montana failure. He had 10,000 employees. He was responsible for the quiet movement of global markets, for the stability of governments. He would not let a single SEAL, a dog, a widow, and a computer nerd derail his stock price. He pressed a single, unmarked button on his console. A moment later, a different voice answered. This one was female, crisp and without accent. Yes, sir? Activate Aegis 1, the director said. There was a half-second of silence. Sir, Aegis 1 is currently engaged in Bogota. Retask her. Effective immediately. Understood. What is the objective? The director looked back out the window. Liquidation. The Montana portfolio is a total loss. I want every asset scrubbed. The widow, the child, the local management, Thorne, the contractor, Stryker, and the primary variable, Kilgore and his K9. I want all of them erased. All of them. Sir, that's a significant domestic footprint, which is why I am sending Aegis 1. This is no longer a resource grab. It is a sanitation problem. I want a ghost. I want this file closed by sunrise, day after tomorrow. Is that clear? Yes, sir. She's in the air. Back at the ranch, dawn had broken. The gray light filled the kitchen. There was a false, fragile peace. Sarah, her hands shaking, was making a pot of coffee. Leo had woken up and was sitting on the floor, his arms wrapped around Kodiak's thick neck, whispering into his fur. Jack was at the kitchen table. He was field stripping the captured M4S, his movements economical and practiced. He was a warrior, and his instincts were screaming. They had won the battle, but in doing so, they had told the enemy exactly who they were and exactly where to find them. He finished cleaning the last rifle, the click-clack of the bolt sliding home echoing in the quiet room. He looked up at Sarah. You need to pack, you and Leo. Ghost can have you on a plane out of Billings in 3 hours. New names, new life, whatever it takes. What? Sarah looked stunned. But we won. You said it yourself. The CPS agent is arrested. The bad men are tied to a tree. I tied up a team, Jack said, his voice hard. Not the company. You don't just beat a monster like this. You just make it angry. They'll send someone else, someone better. As if to punctuate his words, Kodiak, who had been relaxed under Leo's affection, suddenly went rigid. He didn't stand. He didn't growl. He lifted his head, his ears flattening. Kodiak? Leo asked, feeling the change. The dog rose, disentangling himself from the boy. He walked to the center of the room, his entire body tense. He let out a high, thin whine. It was a sound Jack had heard only once before in Afghanistan, right before a sniper's round had obliterated the spot the dog had just been standing. It wasn't the sound of aggression. It was the sound of fear. Jack. Sarah whispered, seeing the dog. Jack was already on his feet, rifle in hand. What is it, Kay? What do you hear? Kodiak didn't look at the door. He didn't look at the window. He looked up, at the ceiling, at the open, empty sky. A new player was on the board. The high-pitched whine from Kodiak was a sound Jack hadn't heard since their last tour, a sound that meant airborne threat, non-visible. It was the frequency of advanced, low-observable rotor blades, or a high-end surveillance drone. What is it, boy? Jack said, his voice low, already scanning the ceiling as if he could see through it. He grabbed Sarah by the arm. The root cellar. Now. You and Leo. Go! The cellar was a concrete box under the kitchen floor, accessed by a trap door. It was the only part of the house that wasn't made of dry, flammable wood. It was their only hard cover. Sarah, her face white, grabbed Leo's hand and pulled him toward the door. But what? Crash. The front door didn't just open. It exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by a boot kick of pure, desperate force. It wasn't Aegis 1. It was Stryker. He stood there, a man unraveled. His $3,000 suit was rumpled, his face slick with sweat. His arrogance was gone, replaced by the feral panic of a cornered animal. He held a Sig Sauer P226, and his hands were shaking. Kilgore! He screamed, his voice cracking. He saw the backpack with the meth lab kit on the table. Give me the bag. Give me the comms you took. I got the call. I'm disavowed. They're coming for me too. I need leverage. I need... He saw Sarah, frozen between the table and the cellar door. His logic snapped. He lunged, grabbing her, spinning her around, and pressing the muzzle of the Sig to her temple. The bag! He shrieked, his eyes wild. Or I'll kill her right now. I'm not dying for this shithole. Jack, who had been raising his captured M4, froze. It was a classic, unwinnable standoff. A rifle in a 10-foot room against a pistol at a hostage's head. Okay, Jack said, his voice a calm, level baritone. He was trying to de-escalate, to slow the man's adrenalized heartbeat. Okay, Stryker. You can have it. Just easy on the trigger. Let her go. We can both walk away. Liar, Stryker spat, pulling Sarah tighter. You're him. You're the one who... Just put the bag on the floor. Kick it over. Jack was lowering the rifle, his body language communicating surrender, when a new voice, calm, female, and utterly bored, cut through the tension. "You're a very messy man, Mr. Stryker." Stryker's head snapped toward the shattered doorway. Standing there, framed by the broken wood, was Aegis 1. She looked like she belonged on the cover of Backpacker magazine fit, in her late 30s, wearing high-end hiking gear, her hair in a tight ponytail. She held a suppressed pistol, and it was aimed not at Jack, but at Stryker. Twip. The sound was no louder than a staple gun. Stryker's eyes went wide. He looked down, confused, at the small, dark hole that had appeared in the center of his chest. He looked at Jack. He gurgled. Then he collapsed, releasing Sarah, who fell to the floor, sobbing. Aegis 1 stepped over Stryker's dying body, her pistol never wavering. "Thank you, Mr. Kilgore," she said. "He was on my list. He was just inconveniently loud. Now, it's just you." Jack's rifle was up, but she was already moving. She didn't lunge for Jack. She lunged for Leo. In a movement so fast it blurred, she grabbed the boy from the floor, where he had been cowering near Kodiak, and hauled him to his feet. She pressed her pistol, still warm, to the child's temple. "Drop the rifle," she said. There was no emotion in her voice. "Or I will liquidate this asset. Your choice." This was it. The true standoff. The professional. She hadn't come to negotiate. She hadn't come to threaten. She had come to clean. Jack looked at the woman, at the gun, at the terrified, silent scream on Leo's face. He looked at Kodiak, who was standing stiff-legged by the fireplace, every muscle in his body coiled, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Slowly, Jack bent his knees and placed the M4 on the floor. "Good," she said. "On your knees, hands behind your head." "He's a child," Jack said, his voice low as he knelt. "You don't need him. This is between us. My orders are liquidation. All assets. The child, the mother, you, the dog." She ticked them off, bored. "You have compromised a multi-billion-dollar operation. The director is tidy. He doesn't like loose ends. And you, Mr. Kilgore, are the biggest loose end of all." She raised the pistol, aiming it at the center of Jack's forehead. She was 10 feet away. Sarah was a crumpled, sobbing heap against the wall. Leo was rigid with terror. The woman's entire focus was on Jack. The dog, to her, was just part of the inventory. An animal. It was a fatal, arrogant mistake. Jack's hands were locked behind his head, but his eyes were on his dog. He made no sound. He didn't move his lips. He just widened his eyes, the alert signal. Kodiak, who had been waiting for a single word, a single release from his stay command, tensed. The woman's finger tightened on the trigger. From his kneeling position, Jack's right hand, still behind his head, gave the signal. It wasn't a fist. "Get him." It was 2 fingers, flicked sharply against the back of his own skull. Zwei. A command from their old language. Secondary target. Weapon arm. Before the sound of the trigger's sear break could register, Kodiak was in the air. He didn't bark. He didn't aim for her throat. He obeyed the command. He launched himself across the kitchen, a 90-pound missile of fur and muscle, and his jaws clamped down, with the full, devastating power of a Belgian Malinois, on the one thing he was told to take, her right arm. The sound was a sickening, wet crunch of bone and sinew. The woman screamed a high, sharp shriek of pure, agonizing shock. The suppressed pistol fired, the round zipping harmlessly past Jack's ear and punching a hole in the plaster wall behind him. Her entire structure, her entire focus, was shattered. It was the 1 second Jack needed. He exploded from his knees, not a man, but a compressed spring. He didn't go for his rifle. He was a CQC specialist. He hit her. A full body, shoulder-first collision. He drove her back, away from Leo, who scrambled on all fours toward his mother. Kodiak, on the shouted command, "Aus, out," released his grip and backed away, barking furiously, holding the perimeter. The woman was a professional. Even with her arm shattered, her left hand was already snatching a thin carbon fiber knife from her belt. But Jack was already inside her guard. He saw the knife. He blocked her left wrist with a bone-jarring parry. His right hand, formed into a rigid blade, delivered 3 strikes, so fast they blurred into one motion. Throat, solar plexus, temple. Her eyes went wide with a final terminal surprise. The knife clattered to the floor. She collapsed, a marionette with its strings cut. The kitchen was suddenly, violently silent. The only sounds were Leo sobbing, Sarah hyperventilating, and the low, panting growl of Kodiak as he stood guard over the 2 fallen bodies. Jack, breathing heavily, his knuckles bleeding, moved to the assassin. She was alive, but she was done. He secured her pistol, her knife, and zip-tied her hands. He looked at Sarah, who was holding her son so tightly he could barely breathe. "It's over," Jack said, his voice raw. He walked to the counter and picked up the sat phone. He hit 1 on his speed dial. "Ghost," Jack said, his voice flat and exhausted. "It's done. I've got a live one, high value, and a dead one. PMC. Stryker. The ranch is secure." He paused, looking at the mess. "Call the feds, Ghost, not the local sheriff. Call the feds. Tell them to come to the Miller Ranch. And tell them to bring a cleanup crew." Part 8. The Honor and the Peace. The first arrivals weren't the county cops. They came 90 minutes later, not with sirens, but with the quiet, heavy crunch of gravel under the tires of 4 black, identical Chevrolet Suburbans. Men in dark blue windbreakers, FBI emblazoned in yellow on the back, emerged. These were not the local field office guys. This was HRT, the hostage rescue team, the varsity squad. They fanned out, their movements crisp and economical, a perimeter established in 30 seconds. Jack, his captured rifle slung, met the lead agent on the porch. The agent, a man named Harris, with a face like carved granite, just looked at the scene. 2 bodies, one live and furious, high-end assassin zip-tied to a chair, and a pile of captured gear. Jack didn't give a long speech. He just pointed. Aegis 1, professional cleaner. Responsible for the man in the doorway, Stryker. He was PMC, here to frame the homeowner. He pointed to the meth lab kit. That was his package. His 4-man ground team is zip-tied to a tree by the creek bed, awaiting pickup. You'll find their weapons cache there too. Harris stared at Jack. He saw the mud, the blood on his knuckles, the calm in his eyes. He saw the Malinois sitting at his heel, watching everything. Harris had read the file Ghost had uploaded on the flight-in. "Mr. Kilgore," Harris said, extending a hand. "You just gift-wrapped a RICO case that's been eluding us for 5 years. You, your friend, Ghost, and your dog just decapitated a shadow organization. We'll take it from here." "She's the high-value target," Jack said, nodding at Aegis 1, who was glaring at him with pure, cold hatred. "She works directly for the director. She'll flip or she'll die. Either way, she's your link." "We know," Harris said. "Get some rest, son. This fight's over." The fallout was not a storm, it was an earthquake. In the 72 hours that followed, Ghost's digital bomb, combined with the testimony of a very motivated Aegis 1 who chose a deal over a dark hole, ripped the parent corporation apart from the inside. The director wasn't arrested publicly. He was seen, in a bespoke suit, stepping into an unmarked sedan in a Manhattan parking garage, and was never seen again. The Aegis stock, once a powerhouse, was delisted. The ski resort became a federal Superfund site, a toxic monument to corporate greed. And in Montana, the local news was just as dramatic. The local muscle thugs from the F-250, Thorne's original messengers, were arrested trying to cross into Canada. Sheriff Barnes, the man who had been on Aegis's payroll, was led from his office in cuffs by the state attorney general. The paper war had ended, and the kinetic war had been won. But for Jack, the real war, the one inside his head, had just entered its final phase. He was still at the cabin. The feds had asked him to stay, but the quiet was different. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. 2 weeks later, the air was clear. The sky was a deep, impossible blue, and the smell of roasting pork filled the valley. "You're just gonna sit over there?" Sarah's voice called out. Jack was on his cabin porch. She was at hers, a quarter-mile away, where a small crowd had gathered. The other ranchers, the guy from the feed store, the new interim sheriff, they were all there. A thank you barbecue. Kodiak, who was lying at Jack's feet, lifted his head and whined, smelling the food. "All right, Kay, let's go," Jack muttered, feeling more exposed than he had in the firefight. He and Kodiak walked over. It was awkward. These were people of the land, not people of war. They didn't know what to say. The new sheriff, a woman with a no-nonsense face, walked up to him and handed him a cold beer. "The U.S. Attorney's Office," she said, "sends its unofficial thanks." "What you did?" "Well, you saved this whole valley, Mr. Kilgore." "Jack," he said, taking the beer. "Jack," she agreed. "They're gone. For good. You're safe here." He watched as Sarah moved through the small crowd, laughing. He watched Leo, who wasn't hiding behind his mother's legs. The boy was running with 2 other ranch kids, throwing a stick. For the first time, Jack saw the place not as a tactical liability, but as a home. Later, as the sun began to dip, painting the ridges in shades of gold and purple, the crowd thinned. Jack was sitting on Sarah's porch swing, Kodiak lying at his feet. Leo approached him, his hands behind his back. He was shy, but his eyes were bright. This is for him," Leo said. He held out his gift. It wasn't a toy. It was a new collar. It was thick, heavy-duty leather, the kind a working ranch dog would wear. On the small brass nameplate, Leo had, in wobbly letters, scratched one word with a nail, Kodiak, and under it, a second word, Protector. "He's not retired," Leo said, his voice small but certain. "He's our protector." Jack felt a tightness in his throat he hadn't felt in a decade. He knelt. "Go on, bud. You give it to him." Leo fumbled with the buckle, taking off Kodiak's old, faded, retired military collar. He fastened the new one. Kodiak, sensing the gravity of the moment, sat perfectly still, then licked Leo's face, making the boy shriek with laughter. Jack stood up. Sarah was standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him. It was strong and perfect. "The feds cleared out my bank accounts," she said, looking out at the land. "The injunction's gone. Ghost, he's a talker. He set up a victims fund with some of Aegis's seized assets. We're going to be okay." "Good," Jack said. They stood in silence, a comfortable, shared quiet. "So," she said, "where will you go, now that it's over?" Jack looked at the mountains. He looked at the ranch house, its broken door now replaced with a new, solid oak one. He looked at Leo, who was now leaning against Kodiak, reading a comic book to him. The dog, for the first time, was not on watch. His eyes were closed. He was asleep, in the sunshine, on the porch of a home, surrounded by his family. Jack took a sip of coffee. He wasn't the ghost who had arrived here 6 weeks ago. He wasn't running from anything. "I don't know," Jack said, a small smile touching his lips. "I was looking for somewhere quiet. I think I just found it." He had come to the big empty to find peace, and had, in the middle of a war, finally found it. Not in the absence of trouble, but in the presence of a purpose. Narrator's voice. Thank you for following the story of Jack and Kodiak, a journey that began in the search for quiet and ended in the defense of a home. We've watched a broken veteran and his K9 partner prove that their deadliest weapons weren't their rifles or their fangs, but their courage and their loyalty. They've earned their peace, and the Miller Ranch is finally safe. But as we close this chapter, it leaves us with a question for all of you who have followed their fight. We've seen Jack and Kodiak find their new purpose, but it makes you wonder, is a true warrior ever really retired? Or are they just waiting for the right fight? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching.